تعجل بالقرآن من قبل أن يقضى إليك وحيه وقل رب زدني علما.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا. من يهديه الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد. So today then we carry on with Al-Aqidah Al-Wasitiyyah of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, and we've got to the section where he mentions بل هم الوسط في فرق الأمة كما أن الأمة هي الوسط في الأمم. In this section, he talks about how Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, they are upon the middle path, neither in negligence on one side, nor upon extremism on the other side, but that Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, their pathway is the middle pathway. And just like that, this Ummah, the whole Ummah, is upon the middle pathway compared to the other Ummah, compared to the Jews, compared to the Christians, the Muslims, Al-Islam. This Ummah is upon the middle path. So he said, بَلْ هُمُ الْوَسَطُ في فرق الأمة, that Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, they are in the middle, upon the middle path between all of the other misguided groups and sects of this Ummah. And just like that, this whole Ummah is upon the middle path in between all of the other Ummah. Here now, Shaykh Al-Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala highlights how this Ummah, the Ummah of Al-Islam of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, is indeed upon that balanced path, upon that middle path. And he gives multiple examples here. So he says, الأمة هي الوسط بين الأمم، يعني الأمم السابقة، وذلك من عدة أوجه. That this Ummah is upon the middle path between the other Ummah, between the other nations and religions that came before, and that is the case from multiple angles. The first, في حق الله تعالى, in regards to the right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in regards to the right of Allah. كانت اليهود تصف الله بالنقائص فتلحقه بالمخلوق، وكانت النصارى تلحق المخلوق الناقص بالرب الكامل. أما هذه الأمة فلم تصف الرب بالنقائص ولم تلحق المخلوق به. The Jews, they describe or attribute to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deficiencies. The Jews attribute deficiencies to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so they it is as though they are attaching Allah alongside the creation by attributing Him with deficiencies. And as for the Christians, they attached this creation that is deficient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is upon perfection. But as for this ummah, then neither did we attribute any deficiencies to Allah, and neither did we attach creation alongside Allah. Creation alongside Allah, that they claim Isa alayhi salam is a part of Allah, is the son of Allah. That is a means of them attaching creation and equaling creation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as for the Jews, it is well known about their attribution of deficiencies to Allah, and we mentioned some of those in last week's lecture. So Ahlul Sunnah did neither of that. Neither do we attribute any deficiencies to Allah, and neither do we attach any of the creation and equal them to Allah. That is in terms of the right of Allah. Secondly, in terms of the right of the prophets. In terms of the right of the prophets, كذبت اليهود عيسى ابن مريم وكفرت به. The Jews, they belied Isa alayhi salam and they disbelieved in him. وغلت النصارى فيه. And as for the Christians, they exaggerated in the right of Isa alayhi salam, حتى جعلته إلها, until they declared Isa to be a God. So you see the two extremes there. The Jews denied Isa alayhi salam and they disbelieved in him. The Christians exaggerated in the right of Isa alayhi salam and declared him to be God himself. Whereas this ummah, أما هذه الأمة فآمنت به بدون غلو وقالت هو عبد الله ورسوله. But as for this ummah, we believe in Isa alayhi salam without any exaggeration. So we are not like the Jews who rejected Isa alayhi salam and did not accept him and believe in him. And neither are we like the Christians who exaggerated in terms of the right of Isa alayhi salam and declared him to be a God himself. Rather, we, the Ummah of Al-Islam, we accept and we believe in Isa alayhi salam as one of the greatest messengers of Allah, but we do not exaggerate and fall into excessiveness in claiming that he has a rububiyyah within him. Thirdly, the balance of this ummah can be seen in the aspect of al-ibadat, in terms of worship. النصارى يدينون لله عز وجل بعدم الطهارة، بمعنى أنهم لا يتطهرون من الخبث. يبول الواحد منهم ويصيب البول ثيابه ويقوم ويصلي في الكنيسة. واليهود بالعكس، إذا أصابتهم النجاسة فإنهم يقرضونها من الثوب فلا يطهرها الماء عندهم، حتى إنهم يبتعدون عن الحائض لا يؤكلونها ولا يجتمعون بها. when it comes to the issue of worship, ibadat, you see how the other they went into exaggeration with the affair and they were not upon the middle path. You see, for example, the Christians who did not give attention to purification, and so perhaps one of them urinates and the urine falls upon his garment, and he will simply arise and go and pray in his church with those garments as they are. Whereas the Jews went to the other extreme when it came to issues of purification, went to the other extreme in the issues of purification. So as an example, when the woman is on her period, the Jews will not mix with her whatsoever. They will separate themselves from her and distance themselves from her and not even sit at the same table to eat with her. Such is the exaggeration they fell into in regards to a woman on her period. Likewise, when it comes to purification of garments, it is mentioned about them that they would not suffice with washing a garment, but rather they would scrape it and scrape it and scrape it and then wash it. Exaggeration beyond what is required in the purification of an impurity. So this ummah did not go into exaggeration on these affairs. هذه الأمة فهم وسط فيقولون لا هذا ولا هذا لا يشق الثوب ولا يصلى بالنجاسة. You don't scrape your garment so much you end up ripping it, trying to purify it. Neither do you have negligence and leave impurity upon it. Rather you wash it. Use the water and wash the garment until that impurity is removed, and then you can pray in it. And when it comes to the woman upon her period, you do not have to separate and isolate yourself from her. Rather, you can sit with her and eat with her and even engage in some degree of intimacy, but not the intercourse. So this ummah, once again upon the middle path. Intercourse is not permissible, but the other interactions are. Whereas the Jews exaggerated and isolated her upon her period, will not even sit at the same table and eat with her. So again you see, when it comes to ibadat, when it comes to actions of worship, how you have the other nations falling into either negligence, extremism in negligence, or extremism in exaggeration. Fourthly, في باب المحرمات من المآكل والمشارب. When it comes to the issue of what is permissible and not permissible to consume, from the affairs that are impermissible to consume, from the food and the drink, the Christians made it permissible to eat even the haram. They made it permissible to eat even the haram, and that which is unpleasant, they made it permissible to eat everything. And as for the Jews, حرم عليهم كل ذي ظفر. It is mentioned in the Quran regarding the Jews, and unto those who are Jews we forbade every animal with undivided hoof, and we forbade them the fat of the ox and the sheep, except what adheres to their backs or their entrails, or is mixed up with the bone. Thus we recompense them for their rebellion, and verily we are truthful. As it mentions in Surah Al-An'am, وَعَلَى الَّذِينَ هَادُوا حَرَّمْنَا كُلَّ ذِي ظُفْرٍ وَمِنَ الْبَقَرِ وَالْغَنَمِ حَرَّمْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ شُحُومَهُمَا إِلَّا مَا حَمَلَتْ ظُهُورُهُمَا أَوِ الْحَوَايَا أَوْ مَا اخْتَلَطَ بِعَظْمٍ ذَلِكَ جَزَيْنَاهُمْ بِبَغْيِهِمْ وَإِنَّا لَصَادِقُونَ. So many affairs were made impermissible for them upon their transgression and their rebellion. But this ummah, once again upon the middle path, the rulings that have been decreed for us, أُحِلَّتْ لَهُمُ الطَّيِّبَاتِ وَحُرِّمَتْ عَلَيْهِمُ الْخَبَائِثِ. The good and the pure has been made halal for us, and the evil and that which has badness in it, that which is not pure, then that has been made haram for us. Upon that balanced and middle path, not upon the level of the rulings that came upon the Jews for their rebellion. And as for the Christians, they made it permissible to eat as they wish, whatever it may be, even if it be from the disgusting affairs. Fifthly or sixthly, wherever we reach now, fil qasas, in the laws of retribution. Once again you see how this ummah is upon the balanced path, upon the middle path, whereas the other nations, they had rulings of excess beyond that. فالقصاص فرض على اليهود والتسامح عن القصاص فرض على النصارى. With the Jews, it is an obligation to carry out the retributional killing, the capital punishment, that type of thing, where one is killed in exchange for the murder that he committed, an obligation upon them. Whereas the Christians, it was an obligation upon them to forgive and not carry out the retributional killing. As for this ummah, then it is balanced again. You have the option of the retributional killing. You have the option of taking the blood money. You have the option of just forgiving outright, not even any blood money. All of those options are available. So once again, this ummah is upon that balanced middle path. فَكَانَتِ الْأُمَّةِ الْإِسْلَامِيَّةِ وَسَطًا بَيْنَ الْأُمَمِ بَيْنَ الْغُلُوِّ وَالتَّقْصِيرِ. So this ummah is upon the middle path, upon the middle way between the other nations, between the other religions who fell into extremism or negligence. And just like that, فَأَهْلُ السُّنَّةِ وَالْجَمَاعَةِ بَيْنَ فِرَقِ الْأُمَّةِ كَالْأُمَّةِ بَيْنَ الدِّيَانَاتِ الْأُخْرَى. يعني أنهم وسط. So just like this religion of Islam is upon that middle way compared to the other religions, then Ahlul Sunnah within Islam are upon the middle way compared to the other sects. ثم ذكر المؤلف رحمه الله أصولا خمسة كان أهل السنة والجماعة فيها وسطا بين فرق الأمة. Then, and this is a very important section, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah mentions 5 key aspects where it highlights how Ahlul Sunnah are upon that middle pathway, and that the groups of deviation, they are upon extremism or neglect or negligence. So he said, فَهُمْ وَسَطٌ في باب صفات الله سبحانه وتعالى بين أهل التعطيل الجهمية وأهل التمثيل المشبهة. Firstly, in the aspect of the names and attributes of Allah, in regards to the names and attributes of Allah, Ahlus Sunnah, the methodology of Ahlus Sunnah is upon that balanced and middle path. Whereas you will see the groups of deviation did not remain upon that path, rather they deviated away from it. So you have on one side Ahlul Ta'atil, the Mu'attilah, those who reject the names and attributes of Allah to their varying degrees. From amongst them the Jahmiyyah. And on the other side, Ahlul Tamthil, the Mushabbiha, those who make resemblance between the names and attributes of Allah and creation. And those are the two overall sects of deviance, the Mu'attilah and the Mushabbiha. Those are the two overall categories. Mu'attilah on one side, those who reject the names and attributes of Allah in their varying degrees, and the Mushabbiha, those who affirm them, but to such a degree they make resemblance between Allah and the creation. Those are the two broad categories that the groups they fall under. So the Shaykh says, هذان طرفان متطرفان أهل التعطيل الجهمية وأهل التمثيل المشبهة. فالجهمية, so the Jahmiyyah, ينكرون صفات الله عز وجل. They deny the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. بل غلاتهم ينكرون الأسماء. And in fact, the extreme Jahmiyyah, they even reject the names of Allah. يقولون لا يجوز أن نثبت لله اسما ولا صفة. Those extreme Jahmiyyah, they say it is not permissible for us to attribute to Allah a name or an attribute. لأنك إذا أثبتت له اسما شبهته بالمسميات أو صفة شبهته بالموصوفات. They said, because if you affirm a name to Allah, then by your very act of that affirmation, you are going to be comparing Him to creation. And if you affirm an attribute to Him, then by that very act of yours of affirmation of an attribute, you are going to be comparing Him to creation who have that same attribute. إذن لا نثبت اسما ولا صفة. They said, therefore, to avoid making resemblance of Allah to creation, we will simply not affirm any name or attribute. So like we said before, the basic principle that they began off is a correct principle, that we do not make any resemblance between Allah and creation. But then that basis, whereas Ahlul Sunnah remained upon it, upon the middle path, they did not remain upon it. They took it further and further and further away until that principle, they took it away from the middle path out to an extreme. So they began saying, we cannot compare Allah to creation. Correct. We cannot compare Allah to creation. Cannot, until they started saying, the only way we cannot then is by simply denying the names and attributes of Allah. Their exaggeration upon that principle took them away from the middle path. And we mentioned last time, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, he said, you fell into exactly what you claimed to be running away from. You claimed that you were fleeing from ever making any resemblance between Allah and the creation, but by denying and rejecting all of the names and attributes of Allah, then you have indeed made resemblance between Allah and nothingness. You have compared Allah to Al-Adam, to nothingness. So you have fallen into exactly what you attempted to flee from. وَمَا أَضَافَ اللَّهُ إِلَى نَفْسِهِ مِنَ الْأَسْمَاءِ فَهُوَ مِنْ بَابِ الْمَجَازِ وَلَيْسَ مِنْ بَابِ التَّسَمِّ بِهَذِهِ الْأَسْمَاءِ. And they say, if Allah has named Himself with names which are obviously there in the Quran and the Sunnah, they say, but that's only metaphorical. That is only something which is not reality. It is not actually in reality a name of Allah. Allah only mentioned those affairs in a metaphorical sense, in some other sense, not in the sense of reality. And that is their exaggeration and misguidance. More of the groups who fall under this banner of the Mu'attilah, one of them is Al-Mu'tazilah. Al-Mu'tazilah ينكرون الصفات ويثبتون الأسماء. They reject the attributes, but they affirm the names. So you remember the ones who say Allah is Al-Hayy but without Hayat. Allah is Al-Alim but without Ilm. Allah is the knowledgeable but without knowledge. And Allah is the ever-living but without life. And various examples like that where they affirm the name but do not affirm the attribute. The Ash'ariyyah يثبتون الأسماء وسبعا من الصفات. They affirm the names and only 7 of the attributes. They affirm the names but only 7 of the attributes. وَكُلُّ هَؤُلَاءِ يَشْمَلُهُمْ اسْمُ التَّعْطِيلِ. The Jahmiyyah, the Mu'tazilah, the Ash'ariyyah, they are all under the banner of Mu'attilah. Those who reject and deny the names and attributes of Allah at their varying degrees. لكن بعضهم معطل تعطيلا كاملا. So varying degrees, some of them are upon absolute rejection of everything, like the extreme Jahmiyyah. وبعضهم تعطيلا نسبيا. And some of them, their rejection is relative, proportionate. مثل المعتزلة, like the Mu'tazila, who affirm some of it and reject some of it. They affirm the names and they reject the attributes. And the Ash'ari, who affirm the names and affirm the attributes, but only 7 of them and reject the remainder. So they have their different degrees of ta'til. But they are all under the banner of that side, the Mu'attilah. Those who fell into rejection of attributes, and that's where their deviance was. The other banner on the other side is the Mushabbihah. They are the ones يثبتون لله الصفات. They affirm the attributes of Allah. ويقولون يجب أن نثبت لله الصفات. They say it is a must, obligation, we have to affirm the attributes of Allah. لأنه أثبتها لنفسه. Because Allah has affirmed them for Himself. لكن يقولون إنها مثل صفات المخلوقين. But they say that the attributes of Allah are like, resemblant of the attributes of creation. And they likewise started off upon a principle that was correct, that we must affirm the attributes of Allah, not the Mu'attilah. We are not like the Mu'attilah, they said. We affirm the attributes of Allah. But then they took that principle from the middle path and began exaggerating with it, to the level that they went out away from the middle path in exaggeration of that principle, to saying that we must affirm the attributes of Allah absolutely, and Allah would only address us with attributes that we can comprehend. And so if Allah has mentioned these attributes about Himself that we affirm, then they must be like the attributes that we recognize and understand. And so they began comparing Allah to creation. And so Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah said about them, يَعْبُدُونَ صَنَمًا. The Mu'attilah يَعْبُدُونَ عَدَمًا, and these Mushabbiha يَعْبُدُونَ صَنَمًا. It is as though they have made an idol resembling the attributes of Allah to creation. فهؤلاء غلوا في الإثبات وأهل التعطيل غلوا في التنزيه. So the Mushabbiha went to the extreme in affirmation until they began resembling Allah to creation. And the Mu'attilah went to the extreme in rejection until they ended up resembling Allah to nothingness. No names, no attributes, or only partial names and attributes. فهؤلاء قالوا يجب عليك أن تثبت لله وجها وهذا الوجه مثل وجه أحسن واحد من بني آدم. So the Mushabbiha, as an example, they said you have to affirm the face of Allah. And the face of Allah is like the best face of creation. The best face of somebody in creation, then that is how the face of Allah is. And that is of course a lie and incorrect. قالوا لأن الله خاطبنا بما نعقل ونفهم. They said because Allah addressed us with what we comprehend and what we understand. So if Allah told us He has a face, then it must be what we understand and comprehend about faces, these faces. But which one? The best one. Whoever is the best of the faces of Bani Adam, that is the one to the likes of Allah. Exaggeration and deviance that they fell into like that. فهو على زعمهم والعياذ بالله على مثل أحسن واحد من الشباب الإنساني. So according to them, the face of Allah is like the most handsome face from one of the youth of mankind. That is their exaggeration and their deviance and misguidance. ويدعون أن هذا هو المعقول. And this is where the deviance falls in. They claim that this is rational. They say that's the rational way to think about these attributes. Allah would only address us with what we know. And these are the faces that we know. So if Allah has a face, then it must be like one of these faces, and we'll say it's the best one of these faces. And that is of course incorrect, and that is not rational at all. Rather, what is rational is that the Creator is superior to the creation, and that there is no resemblance between the creation and the Creator. أما أهل السنة والجماعة فقالوا نحن نأخذ بالحق الذي مع الجانبين فنأخذ بالحق في باب التنزيه فلا نمثل ونأخذ بالحق في باب الإثبات فلا نعطل بل إثبات بلا تمثيل وتنزيه بلا تعطيل ونحن نثبت ولكن بدون تمثيل فنأخذ بالأدلة من هنا ومن هنا. So as for Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, then we say that we take the truth from both sides, because remember, both sides started off with an accurate principle from Ahlul Sunnah, from the side of the Mu'attila, that we cannot ever create any resemblance between Allah and the creation. Absolutely correct. Ahlul Sunnah, we take that. That is our principle. We do not make any resemblance between Allah and creation. The Mushabbiha, they also took a correct principle to begin with, that we must affirm the names and attributes of Allah. Absolutely. We affirm the names and attributes of Allah. But then those two together, we affirm the names and attributes of Allah, not reject them, but without resemblance as they fell into. We affirm the names and attributes, but without resemblance. And we declare Allah free of any deficiencies, as the Mu'attila claimed, but without falling into exaggeration and denying and rejecting the attributes. So, إثباتٌ بلا تمثيل, affirmation of the attributes, but without resemblance. And tanzihun bila ta'atil, declaring Allah free of any deficiencies, but without rejecting and denying the attributes. So Ahlul Sunnah, upon that middle pathway. Wal khulasa, so in conclusion, in summary, hum wasatun fi bab as-sifat bayna ta'ifatayn mutatarrifatayn. So Ahlul Sunnah, they are upon that middle path between two groups of extremism. طائفتين متطرفتين, two groups of extremism. طائفة غلت في التنزيه والنفي, a group that went into exaggeration in attempting to free Allah of any deficiencies to the extent they rejected the names and attributes. They are the Jahmiyyah and their likes. وَطَائِفَةٌ غَلَتْ فِي الْإِثْبَاتِ, and the others who went into an exaggeration in affirmation to the extent they fell into resemblance, and they are the Mumaththilah. وأهل السنة والجماعة يقولون لا نغلو في الإثبات ولا في النفي, that we do not exaggerate in affirmation and neither in negation. So we do not exaggerate in affirmation to the level we resemble Allah to creation, and we do not exaggerate in declaring Allah free of deficiencies to the level that we reject and deny the names and attributes. As Allah said, and the ayah which is the basis, the foundation for the bab of al-asma'i was-sifat, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. There is nothing like unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He is the all-hearing and the all-seeing. Then the second aspect. So that was the first aspect, the aspect of the names and attributes, and how Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, they are upon the middle path when it comes to the names and attributes of Allah. The second is af'alullah, the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Shaykh al-Islam says, وَهُمْ وَسَطٌ فِي بَابِ أَفْعَالِ اللَّهِ بَيْنَ الْجَبْرِيَّةِ وَالْقَدَرِيَّةِ. That Ahlul Sunnah, we are upon the middle path when it comes to the actions of Allah between the Jabriyyah and the Qadariyah. I will explain those in a moment. And this is in regards to when we talk about the actions of Allah, meaning the decree. This is talking about the chapter of the decree. How when it comes to the belief in the decree, Ahlul Sunnah are in the middle, and then you have groups exaggerating either side. ففي باب القدر انقسم الناس إلى ثلاثة أقسام. There are three overall broad groups when it comes to the decree. قسم آمنوا بقدر الله عز وجل وغلوا في إثباته حتى سلبوا الإنسان قدرته واختياره وقالوا إن الله فاعل كل شيء وليس للعبد اختيار ولا قدرة وإنما يفعل الفعل مجبرا عليه بل إن بعضهم ادعى أن فعل العبد هو فعل الله ولهذا دخل من بابهم أهل الاتحاد والحلول وهؤلاء هم الجبرية. One group of extremism when it comes to the decree are the Jabriyah. They are the ones who believe in the decree of Allah. They accept and believe in the decree of Allah, but then they exaggerate in their belief in the decree of Allah. To the extent that they say, in fact, do we not say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala controls all of the affairs? Absolutely. That Allah decrees everything? Absolutely. They took that to an exaggerated level in saying that you and I have no free will or choice in anything. That Allah does everything, we have no ability or choice in anything that we do. We are compelled upon everything that we do. And some of them even claimed our actions are in fact just the actions of Allah, it's not us. And so this is the Jabriyah. They are basically the group who claimed that we are like a feather in the wind. Whichever way the wind blows, the feather goes that way. And they are the ones who said to the likes of, we are like a deceased body, a corpse. When the person washing you comes to wash you and moves your arm and moves your leg and washes you, what do you do as the corpse? Nothing. If the person washing you moves your arm, what happens? Your arm moves. If he puts it back down, what happens? Your arm goes back. They say that's how it is. We have no control over anything. We have no choice. We have no free will. We are under absolute compulsion under the decree of Allah. If that was the case, then why do the people of paradise go to paradise and why do the people of hellfire go to hellfire? Why are the people of paradise deserving of paradise then? And why are the people of hellfire deserving to be punished then? If they were compelled and absolutely forced upon their actions with no free will and no choice. That is incorrect, of course. We have a free will that Allah gave us. We have a choice in our actions. But of course Allah knows what choices we're going to make already, but at the point of making them, Allah's given us the ability to make them. The second group, إِنَّ الْعَبْدَ مُسْتَقِلٌ بِفِعْلِهِ, the other side of exaggeration. When they said, we are independent in our actions. وَلَيْسَ لِلَّهِ فِيهِ مَشِيئَ وَلَا تَقْدِيرٌ. The extreme ones even said, Allah has nothing to do with the decree in what we do. Allah doesn't decree what we do. We do what we do ourselves. فَقَالَ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَعْلَمُ. The most extreme ones even said, Allah doesn't even know what we're going to do until we do it. The most extreme ones. And those ones, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah said they became extinct. That ideology disappeared. The most extreme, the ones who said Allah doesn't even know what's going to happen until we do it, that they no longer exist, he mentioned. But generally that the ones who claim we are independent in our actions of the decree of Allah, then that general belief persists. فقال إن الله لا يعلم فعل العبد إلا إذا فعله أما قبل فلا يعلم عنه شيئا وهؤلاء هم القدرية مجوس هذه الأمة. So they are the Magians of this Ummah, the Qadariyah, who believe that we are independent and separate in our actions from the decree of Allah. فالأولون غلوا في إثبات أفعال الله وقدره وقالوا إن الله عز وجل يجبر الإنسان على فعله وليس للإنسان اختيار. So the first group went to an exaggerated position saying we are compelled upon what we do. والآخرون غلوا في إثبات قدرة العبد. And the others went to an extreme in saying but Allah gave us option and free will, which is true. But then they exaggerated that to the level of saying we are independent. We do our actions. وقالوا إن القدرة الإلهية والمشيئة الإلهية لا علاقة لها في فعل العبد فهو الفاعل المطلق الاختيار. So they said the will of Allah has nothing to do with our actions. We are separate. But the middle path between that is of course the path of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, where we say, of course Allah has decreed all of the affairs 50,000 years before creation. But at the same time, Allah has given us will and ability. Those are the two key things. Al-Mashi'ah wal-Qudrah. Allah's given us free will and ability to be able to choose whether to do good or to do bad, whether to obey or to disobey. But Allah, of course, knows already what choices we're going to make in life. Hence, it is mentioned in the narration, Allah already knows your place in paradise or hell, because Allah knows what choices we're going to make in life. But in life, Allah's given us that free will and ability to make the choice, to obey or to disobey. And that's why you'll be held accountable in the end for the choices that you made of obeying or disobeying. We'll have to stop on that, but we'll come into more detail on this next week regarding the issues of the decree. And the decree comes up as a separate topic at the end of Wasatiyyah anyway. When we get to that section, we'll do a full analysis regarding the decree. But here, just to understand how Ahlul Sunnah are balanced in the middle path, and the groups of deviation go into extremism either side. So we'll conclude upon that for today. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.